And I'm very pleased to be able to present our speaker this afternoon. For those of us who are architects in the room or were involved in architecture, of course we know that architecture is the supreme and only art. But it's interesting that when you talk to the laity, the priests and the bishops, they don't quite see it that way. And I've always been struck by how boring or ugly or wonderful the building can be, and how the laity are moved by the artwork, by the paintings, the sculpture. And of course, many of us are trying to promote a reintegration of the arts that modernism severed, that artists should go off and do their thing, and architects should go off and do their thing, and we're all artists and we have nothing to do with each other. And you see that in a lot of contemporary work. But I think in the true Catholic spirit, we want to see a reintegration of the arts in painting, sculpture, all the other figurative aspects, symbolism, and architecture. And who better to talk about that but Anthony Visco? Tony Visco has dedicated his life and his career to teaching the figure, to teaching anatomy, drawing, and especially sculpture, and practicing it as a Catholic. And he is, I think, the supreme American Catholic artist who brings together a knowledge about the art of the tradition, the way that the techne or the technique of how to apply it, but also understands theology better than any architect I know, and probably most artists, I think most artists that we know. So please welcome from Philadelphia, Anthony Visco.
Before I start, we have a brief announcement from Eric about lunch cleanup.
Yes. I'm sorry, but just to let you know, anyone who did not get a lunch here, there will be tickets available to use afterwards. You could run next door and grab something to eat. We apologize for that. We're working a little bit on the air conditioning to see what we can do. And for those of you who'd like to attend the tour at the Basilica, we don't want to cut Anthony's talk short. So what we're going to propose is that those of you who'd like to come with me at 1:15 can kind of make your way to the back of the auditorium. I'll meet you at the back of the auditorium on the first floor here. We will exit. And I'm sorry if that takes anyone away, but I don't think it'll be a big problem. Oh, great. And so he's going to come with us, and anyone who's left here can just talk to Anthony or listen to his spirit. So we'll do it that way, and I'll see you all at 1:15 at the back. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming, and I keep saying this is a wonderful conference in the sense that 20 years ago we couldn't have done this. So I congratulate Michael Patrick and all his associates who put this together. One of the problems, as Duncan was mentioning, was the reintegration of architecture, painting, and sculpture to serve the greater glory of God. We got separated for not any good reason at all. And now we're waiting. The painters and sculptors have been ready. We're waiting for the architects. And if there are students out here, get on board, because architecture is the matrix for our painting and sculpture. In October 1962, John the 23rd called the Second Vatican Council. And at the end of it, the Sacrosanctum Concilium made the announcement that the church has no official style. Ba-boom, bang. And the games began. And there's a very good reason for saying no official style. Mainly because the Catholic vocabulary of art and architecture is so vast and so ongoing that we can't isolate it to any particular time or period, thank God. We don't have to be linear. We don't have to say this begat that. We have many, many, many floor plans, as you can see, and they continue. They continue. These are mostly circle square, but we'll see later that the multiplicity will continue. We go from the fullness of emptiness in the Cistercian model to this, there's no such thing as excessiveness in the Bavarian Baroque. And between the two, well, there's no such thing as excessiveness when we're trying to describe the house of God. So to our mind, those who were talking earlier about decoration, this is decoration in the true sense of the word, the decor that belongs to, say, a soldier, the way one is decorated. So our houses of God need to be decorated in terms of what is appropriate decoration for the Domus Dei. So this idea of no such thing as excess, I don't know if we're going to get back to that very soon, but it is part of our Catholic heritage, no doubt about it. When I wrote an article for Sacred Architecture Journal on anatomy and why we are a corporeal people, I put together these points of presence, witness, and transcendence. And so what I'm showing here are three different models on architecture, painting, and sculpture that all represent these elements, although all three are always in play. And the idea of something must be whole. That is so important in the sense of, especially in depicting the corporality of the church. The modernist never likes the whole. Neither does the avant-gardist or the romantic. They always like the fragment. It's too late. We can't go back. Beauty is a tale that, probably we've lost at some time, and unfortunately we can't grow it back again. And we can't really project the future either. So, but when we look at Catholic art and architecture, it always has a wholeness to it. If it does get fragmented, it has a greater, as I'll get to in other parts, it has a greater reason for being fragmented, for being transcendental. The master architect and the circle. We have this sense of church in the round. We have early models of it, San Stefano Rotonda. All right, it is possible. It is possible, but not in the assembly hall space we're seeing in some of the contemporary models today. So it always has to be based on a theological and liturgical purpose. And function. We are how we process, how we recess, etc. But it's not for style, and it's not for period. We see this again in Ravenna. And again, Ravenna is almost like Dome of the Rock in that octagonal space with the dome above where God, the master designer, puts his calipers down. This idea of light. We have vocabularies of light within Catholic art and architecture. One is light from, as Aquinas calls splendor, giving back. This is the light of God the Father, all right, in these gold mosaics, which we'll see again in the National Basilica. This is very, very different from the light on something, which is more like the Renaissance model to show the corporality of something. We use opaque form, right? And then light through, as we see in a lot of Gothic and Dali and et cetera, in the transcendental sense of light. We could even say there's a sort of symbolism of Trinity here. God the Father, light from, God the Son, the second, light on, opaque form. The Word became flesh. Light through, the Holy Spirit. These are the mosaics from Montreal. And of course, a disorientation here of scale, different figures, different sizes. This is not perspective. Again, Torcello, an octagonal shaped church. And it's in this realm of the circle that we are made in the image and likeness of God. When we exit it, we lose the likeness. We'll talk more about that as we go along. This idea of wanting to be in the circle, wanting to be within that circle has, of course, been repeated throughout history where we're either in the circle, square, one being the temporal and the other being the eternal, circle being eternal, square being mundane. And this idea of putting, as we call it, the Vitruvian Man, this idea of putting the figure within a circle square, we repeat over and over again in floor plans. And we start to see that it doesn't necessarily have to be a cruciform floor plan to be resplendent of or reflective of this body. Here's Francesco Di Giorgio. He does a beautiful circle, beautiful architectural drawings, and a good architect as well, as you all know. His circle square kind of sort of makes it. It's pretty good. And you know, how we square off the circle, etc. But it's not about geometry. It really is about our place in these two worlds and trying to get the two worlds to fit, heaven on earth. Of course, this is the primo model here. Da Vinci figures it out. He says there are two centers. The eternal center is the navel, right? So that becomes the center of the circle. The root of the genitals is the center of the square, and he overlaps them. And then he gives you a scale on the side here, how many palms, and then the very end, 4 fingers. So he breaks this whole thing down in such a way that he's fascinated by the radial church, the radial axis church, and does many drawings of it. Of course, it gets finally manifested in Todi and in other places as well. We still have this model. It's still possible. But again, as you start to see, it does become more of that second form of the presence of light. Light on opaque form, light on the object, not resplendent with windows at all for another purpose. So this idea of now doing the full figure is another Francesco Di Giorgio. As you can see, the top section remains circle square, but we start to develop this cruciform sense here, of course, at the Duomo of Florence, keeping the octagon in the middle. It has all of it. It has all of it. It also has something else that Brunelleschi talks about, membratura. That word's a hard word to translate into English. It means memberedness. You look at the cupola, and you could tell inside and outside how they match. That becomes a significant factor in the sense that we don't have to use that all the time, that the inside and outside doesn't necessarily reflect, as we see in French Gothic, that we want this other element inside as soon as we get in there. But it's, again, not for shock value, not for novelty. It always has another theological purpose behind it. And of course, walking into something that is a cruciform in design, we are, as living members, we are filling the mystical body. There's no doubt about it. That's our purpose here. To, again, get back inside the circle, regain our likeness. We are the image, but we need the likeness back. And when we think about that in terms of image and likeness, that is the dichotomy we're talking about here today. Is it possible for our current state of architecture to have been separated? We have image, but do we have the likeness of God? And of course, here's Francesco Di Giorgio using the same thing for the facade. So the proportions get used over and over again. This is Michelangelo's design for San Lorenzo, never was executed. But nevertheless, the proportions are exactly like Francesco Di Giorgio's. Very corporeal. Alberti. And of course, Brunelleschi again in Santo Spirito. This has some of that element of the outside and the inside don't reflect intentionally. Brunelleschi's not big on facades, and I love to hear Florentines talk about the Michelangelo model, how it should never be done. Leave it rough, leave it like that, leave it. You know, they always go from this beautiful model to the sort of rustic, and they say that's why St. John the Baptist is there. St. John the Baptist and St. Mary Magdalene are their patrons. They like it rough like that. They like it extremely beautiful. Yeah. So again, all opaque form. Yes, there's, you know, you're not going to see stained glass here. It's a different type of light. This does have more to do with the second person. This is a more corporeal sense of art and architecture. Of course, a lot of this is brought about through Franciscan spirituality. We see the development early on, right after the death of St. Francis. And the earliest frescoes and the earliest happenings of this, in terms of from Cimabue to Giotto, are based on Franciscan spirituality. The same sort of bilateral thing, you know, we are a bilateral system. So when we're dealing with a corporeal type church, we also address it in terms of painting and sculpture that is bilateral. And what happens in terms of Catholic painting, this break from the Eastern rite, is our saints are on the same plane. They're in the same space. This development of Sacra Conversazione within worldly architecture. If there was ever a period of coming together of all three, of course, the Renaissance is the most amazing model. And when I taught, I would often wonder, I'd labor so much in teaching anatomy and trying to incorporate it with perspective and light and shade and all these things. I start to realize that these models have no use to a lot of modernist artists. They study it because they think it's a rite of passage, and then they go on. Or you tell them something about the use of center, and they'll say, oh, no, my other teacher said don't ever put anything in the middle. And you start to realize that the modernists this was a dumb tool. Putting something in the middle meant something. So if you want your stuff meaningless, you better not put anything in the center. So some kind of like these Last Supper configurations. And it's, again, very much like our church designs where the tabernacle is central. And to change that, quite frankly, doesn't really mean too much. It would be just novelty at this point to say I did something different. So we have a fusion here, both sign and symbol. Same with the resurrection. We're going to see later there's another development in this that happens in terms of reconfiguring the Christ figure. Again, the central point being the actual hand of baptism. There's something about this frontal plane that we use in this period where it shows an equality of figure, those on the same plane, equidistant from the center. This is a different use of center. This is the Pittitondo of Michelangelo. If modernism did anything, it just destroyed metaphor. We know that. But the underlying meanings here of Iglesia sitting on the cornerstone, the church, pointing to her son, touching him only with the cloth. This is very important. Michelangelo you'll never see Our Lady touch the flesh of Christ directly. And the right arm of the Christ child breaking the scripture open into Old Testament, New Testament. She looking outward. And here's Verrocchio's Incredulity of Thomas. We start to enter another area here of actual witness. This is these, in fact, these two figures were in Washington. I forget when I came down to see the restoration. And of course, the masterpiece here. And again, the hand, the humeral veil, holding the body of Christ. This idea of starts to develop in late Renaissance. Again, it's not a linear thing. We don't necessarily, there's great overlaps in church art and architecture. There's no clear division between Mannerist, Baroque, and these are sort of art school terms. This idea of witness starts to become stronger in the Renaissance. And again, always the ability to go back to the bilateral in different periods. There is no period for it. We're not stuck in any one ever. This is a more contemporary work. This is Annigoni. Again, he returns to the bilateral. The two lunettes of Adam and Eve and the death of Abel. This is Walter Erlbacher. This is in front of the cathedral. This was 1976, right? Yeah, for the Eucharistic Congress. Walter actually went back to a more Apollonian Christ, a beardless Christ. You'll recognize him in the breaking of the bread. All right, so very simple figure. And of course, it's not shown here, but the costal wound is still dripping. So it is a living, resurrected, yet crucified Christ breaking bread. His wife, Martha Erlbacher, painted this St. Catherine Drexel. Again, very straightforward, very bilateral. So, and here's, of course, John 23rd. One thing the bilateral doesn't need to be, though, and this is our difficulty re-entering, it doesn't need to be static. Bilateral doesn't mean static. And there is no conversation here. We have no idea why, the Christ child is in a Pampers, or Mary doesn't know what to do. Here we have again, it's bilateral, but so none of these models are guarantees. It's still what else we bring to it and how it works in cooperation with the entire building, number one, and the painting and sculpture, but also how does it work in terms of liturgy and theology. And here's Duncan Stroik's church or Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe in La Crosse. And yes, it's a return to the cruciform. I feel very strongly that, again, not taking one format or one floor plan over the other, but we're probably going to have to re-enter this with the cruciform. It was our point of exit prior to Vatican II. It was our point. So everything else might have still been happening in terms of modernist art and architecture, but that's outside of our family. That is not a Cosa Nostra, as it were. This is, okay? So all the other arguments about, well, we've got to incorporate these other things that have been discovered through art and architecture is not really relative here. Here's Thomas Gordon Smith. Also with the same idea of light on opaque form. Although you can see from the cupola there that there will be, of course, bathed in natural light. It's the only way to light an opaque form. And here is Mr. Langley. Again, we could see what centrality means here in the Holy Family. Now, this is a photograph of Miguel Pro. This is one of the shrine paintings. We have a little problem here in terms of contemporary art and architecture. Architects don't have it exactly, but painting and sculpture, I should say, because now we have the photograph. We know what some of our sanctified actually looked like. Teresa de Lisieux, etc., Mother Teresa, Padre Pio. So, but we are never, nor we have ever been, a church of realism, all right? We get close to it, but we don't actually use it. We never use the photograph in terms of devotional art, and there's a good reason why. It's always of a period. A photograph is always a memento, and therefore, it's got to be somehow transposed. So Nielsen Carlin, who was commissioned to do the painting for the shrine of Miguel Pro in La Crosse by His Excellency Archbishop Burke, took the photograph, of course, altered it somewhat, changed the lighting on it. You can see that. And basically did a bilateral situation, top and bottom, where Miguel Pro is above, in front of the Trinity, elevating the Eucharist with Our Lady of Guadalupe on the back of his chasuble. And it's this kind of conception that we need to get back here as we represent them. If Vatican II said anything, it really was very clear about not buying over-the-counter art anymore when it said commission the artist. And here we are 40 years later, and we're still struggling with this. But as one priest said, it's usually about 100 years between councils before you get it. And he said, we're doing pretty good for 40 years. And I tend to agree. This is another one of Neil's, Mysterium Tremendum. Again, bilateral axes, very clear, you know exactly what it's about. The second model, the second element, I should say, is that of witness. And this really is where we become a more corporeal people here, more a Eucharistic people, where we try to bring together these two things of the body and blood, soul and divinity of Christ as presented under the appearances of bread and wine, and these images of this opaque corporeal body, full flesh. And, you know, this thing of it must look like the action is still with us. If there is anything that happens in the Baroque or Counter-Reformation art through Ignatian spirituality, through St. Philip Neri, etc., these discussions, St. Philip Neri, for example, he did actually speak to the artists in Rome. And Wittkover thinks that perhaps Caravaggio was present at some of these conversations. St. Ignatius never said anything directly about art, but his idea of the spirituality through darkness, through the tenebrae, you know, letting light in little by little, and this composition of place that he talks about becomes very, very relevant. And the experience depicted is internalized. We have a sense when we look at this, the art of the Counter-Reformation, which I think we're going to see again. We are going to see, we have been through our Mannerist period. And I think of modernism as our mannerism. It wasn't a very good Mannerist period, but it definitely was a Mannerist period in that sense. This idea of the body in motion, it's not stop action. If the Renaissance gave us anything, it was this idea of presence. But we see in Counter-Reformation art that the sense of ongoing, what I always really enjoy thinking of in terms of the physicality of it, is that it sent a really clear message that that was a Bernini drawing, by the way. We're really not sure if that's a Bernini or not, but this idea of the Piazza San Popolo being the arms of the Father welcome us, the whole world in. And again, it was mentioned in some of the previous papers about surrealism. Once we exit the circle square and we're in a more elliptical space, it's not as easy for us to read. We are a frontal people. So this idea of incorporating these elliptical forms in the church after the Counter-Reformation becomes very, very meaningful. Of course, we change from this idea of light and shade. It gets very, very clear that we're dealing with lux et tenebrum, the division of the clear from the murky, not light and dark, clear from murky. So the Tenebristi understood this very, very well and nulled the space, because if Trent, one message that the Council of Trent did recommend is that perhaps we've been too rational in our depictions here. And we should do something, maybe return to the Gothic. That was the suggestion. But this idea of through Ignatian spirituality, this idea of tenebrae came about. So instead of using the model of blue sky background or the nullified space of say, the Byzantine with gold, it goes into darkness. We don't know what time those paintings or those occurrences happen. This is, again, a return to the octagon, Santa Maria della Salute, and quite unreal, you know, when we see this. It's just quite unreal. And that's what the intention was. As Brunelleschi becomes very, very real, the architecture of the Counter-Reformation becomes clearly otherworldly. Of course, just seeing something like that on water doesn't make sense. So. And again, the utilization of perspective. I mean, Andrea Pozzo's book was translated into 17 different languages during his lifetime. That's amazing. That's amazing what a revolution this was. So we start to see that this development from the early stages of Brunelleschi to Rome there's nothing like this. This is, again, part of the Catholic language. There's nothing like this in secular art anywhere, decorative or not decorative. This, again, the idea of ongoing. And we see that the use of something starts to develop actually in the Reformation through Michelangelo, this discovery of ongoing by use of the helical design, that it just keeps the action going and does give it a sense of witness. And the animation that we don't see a lot of today, of course, and But again, I really do feel like there's going to be a return to this. We're ready for it. This, by the way, is here at the National Gallery. If you have an opportunity to go over to the National Gallery and see the Sacred Made Real. Part of Spanish Surrealism starts here in the sense of making it real but not real. It's like me, but it's not like me. That's a real important factor. Dali uses it all the time. It's something, I wish the Spanish speaker could have talked about that aspect of Spanish theology, because it's something that I find absolutely fascinating. They never have quite lost it. Martyrdom of St. Bartholomew by Zubran. Again, Ribera. No, this is Zubran. Correct me. I'll get mixed up here. Maybe it's Velasquez. Anyway, this is Bartholomew again. So we have a form that really is very, very befitting to the architecture as well, and incredible for devotional purposes. These are not decorative in any sense. These are in our churches for devotional purposes. I think one of the greatest shocks for me in my education was I had gotten a Fulbright for rearranging trash piles. They said, where do you want to go? And I said, I think I want to go to Rome. And one of my teachers said, no, I think you should go to Florence. You've got more of that kind of temperament. So I got off the train, and I went right across the street to Santa Maria Novella, because that's where the Masaccio is, and he was always one of my big-time favorites. And what happens in the art history books is you just see the photograph of the Trinity, but nobody told me that there's going to be a pray-Jew there, there's going to be candles there, there's going to be an old lady there praying, there's going to be half-dead flowers. It was still alive and well and being used. And from that moment on, I said, that's it. You can't fool me anymore. This stuff still is living and has a living presence. The idea, again, of how real, when we watch these Spanish Counter-Reformation figures get dressed and decorated, of course it's not realistic. It's Christ carrying the cross as king. Again, the idea of excessiveness that you can't go overboard. And I think we're very far from that concept right now, but it can happen again. We have to keep open to our language, but it's always to touch the corporeal Christ. That is, or bring us at least closer, in terms of art and architecture, light, shade, all the elements. We are very, very privileged people in that we don't have an official style as architects or artists. We don't have to learn from this tradition of inscribing a panel and painting it only these colors and only, we can use perspective or gold background or null space of tenebrism, all of them. Again, this idea of surviving after martyrdom becomes so obvious in the Counter-Reformation art. And this combination of actual and implied form, actual and implied space, actual and implied light. You're not supposed to know what's going on all the time. This is a young Spanish artist, Raul. What's his last name for you? Anyway, Raul is doing incredible work and very prolific. This is his Triumph of Iglesia. And again, he gets a real good sense of excuse me, let me go back there for a second. A Spanish sense of surrealism here. You can go to his website and see more work. I only have these few here. Okay. And as I said, we're seeing more animation in our church figures again, some of the newer commissions. They're not the static, standing there holding the book saying, I wrote the rule. This is one of that I did for Church of the Assumption. The church doesn't have any elements like this. So, you know, that's what I'm saying, your architects, we need you, because we're trying to do, we're a little bit tired of bringing this kind of art to, you know, drywall barns. It ain't working. It's not a good combination. This is a work I did. Here I borrow from the Michelangelo aspect of doing a resurrection figure in a helical mode. This is St. Norbert introducing the risen Christ to Blessed Hugh. This is Daphne du Barry, and she's a very good artist in both France and Italy. This is her St. John the Baptist from Malta. Very animated. And this is Brian Wolf, who's done this for LaSalle. Very good sculptor. And this is Gavin Gardner, who is in Maryland. This is a bronze tabernacle he's designed. So I'm finding out that there is a groundswell here. There's more and more people doing this. This third model, one of transcendence, the ability to use, or quality to use the visual to express the invisible. And this is where it gets a little tough too. We really have to follow the credo, line by line, all 12 lines of it. You know, as artists and architects, go over every one. What does it mean? Creator of all visible and invisible. So that means if we are to imitate the Father as creator, creatures imitating the Father creating, then we have to make some things that represent the visible and the invisible as well. Personal transformation, how do we take this in? How do we take the work in and become transformed by it? That's the artist's responsibility. That's the covenant when we sign on for the job, essentially. A corporeal likeness that is sober or transmundane. How am I doing? 10 minutes to go. Oh, 5 minutes. You're kidding me. All right, we're getting there. Okay. And that's why why we don't use the photograph. Of course, this becomes so significant in something like Sainte-Chapelle, where you don't know how it got there once you go in. You feel like you're trapped inside of a jewel. And so it is very transmundane, this idea of colored light hitting these and changing all the time. That's one thing I do miss in terms of these, some of our newer churches that are so lit with halogen lamps, you can't see the passing of time when you're sitting in front of the Holy Eucharist, which is so important. This is where we become circle square again. This is where time and eternity are trying to meet and reconcile. We're having a little trouble with stained glass. Mainly because, no, really, it's our fenestration is not allowing us, this is not a comment on the artist, the fenestration itself a lot of times is not allowing the artist to do good representational work. And of course, this is hiring a well-known artist to do the window of Cologne. He just pixelated what was there. What an opportunity. And of course, you know, the Gothic does lend itself to the otherworldly because it does, its ornament and its spires, etc., become nothing like any other architecture there is. We don't really do this for other things. If you go to the rooftop of Milan, it's hard to express first. And again, you see the helical on the top spire. You know, so the Gothic used it as well. And here's these triangular floor plans again, where there's an ellipse in the middle. So we have been through a lot of different things here, and yet, like I say, thank God we don't have an official style. We have to be more exploratory. This is what we're seeing more and more of, though, what I call the cell block H style. It is, the sort of the deliberate separation of one side from the other, nothing bilateral at all. This is a floor plan that I'm currently revising in this radial, but it's not really the radial church that we were talking about earlier. This is more of an assembly where everybody's focused on one point and basically on each other. And so it's been reorganized here so that chapel's on one end, baptistry in the middle. Everyone is ad deum toward the main sanctuary, and this, on the other end, what I call the praise band space is now Shrine to Our Lady of Guadalupe. The sad thing is when you double the profile, you can see what space there was for a cruciform church quite easily. Okay, so we're still grasping at this, as you can see. We're going through some growing pains here, but the difference between these two vocabularies in terms of time and space is we have to take account of and reorganize, reacquaint ourselves with our own language. This is supposedly the column of the Temple of Solomon, and of course Bernini takes this, again, the helical design. They're probably the most famous columns in the world, I have to say that. And again, there was no line drawn between so-called Baroque and Rococo. A distortion of space became very, very prevalent as well. If they could do it architecturally, we could do it in terms of painting. No more rational space here, right? Form, a cubic foot of form does not equal a cubic foot of void in mannerist space. It's deliberate. It gives it a very, very tumbling effect, and this is another form of losing equilibrium, Not painting the flesh real. And not knowing how it got there. Still with the veil of mystery. This is, even this simple 19th century figure, St. Tarcisius, has that turning in it. Of course, this is the image that Dalí saw when Pius XII recommended that he go look at this. We need something new here. And understands perfectly well why it has to have a sense of loss of gravity and time and space. This is the first drawing of Gaudí before he does something like this. And I do think that there was something happening here in Sagrada Familia. And it was concurrent with Dalí. This painting is truly one of the few that we know that really, really anchors the idea of transubstantiation. Of course, this is in Washington, too. You can see the relationship, and this is San Giovanni Rotondo. Again, this very openness, using a lot of colored light to come in. And we're, again, trying to get back to it somehow. This is Oakland Cathedral. This, of course, is in Washington also. But you can see that there was still concurrently going on. Someone was trying to do this in a very corporeal way as well. This is a new statue of St. Ignatius at Boston. Again, using this very animated drapery, etc. And this is by Paul Whittle, Our Lady of the Word. And this last part, Duncan, how am I doing? 2 minutes? I'm over. Oh, okay. Image and Likeness of God. This painting by Yang, Our Lady looks at the Most Blessed Sacrament as if it's the Christ child, as if it's the entombment, as if it's the Pietà, as if it's the resurrection, all at once, in perfect adoration. It's these 2 points of going from the corporeal Christ to the Eucharistic Christ that we constantly have to work on in terms of our art and architecture. Very early on, the church had 4 types of nudity: nuditas naturalis, virtualis, temporalis and criminalis. They divide the naked and the nude. This is what the type of anatomy that was available in 78, 79 AD. This is from Pompeii. That's, of course, the Venus. But that's where we were. But early Christian art looked like this. When you're sort of an underground society, you can't really employ, top-notch anatomists to paint Adam and Eve. We have the Byzantine model. Again, there's not a problem with nudity here, as you notice. This is nuditas virtualis. This is Christ, the baptism of Christ. By the time Ghiberti does the doors, there are all four types present. Of course, he has nuditas virtualis or naturalis in the creation of Adam and Eve, and virtualis because they are made in the image and likeness of God. Virtualis in terms of sense, and needless. The idea of this is something we did borrow from classical Greek statuary, which is you are without clothing because you are needless of worldly things. So you are nude, not naked. This is nuditas criminalis, the nakedness of Noah. It's never the nudeness of Noah, it's the nakedness of Noah. And this is the nakedness of Christ, treated as a criminal. And we see this transition here as we get more and more, as soon as we break from the East, this more and more corporeal Christos patiens versus the Christos triumphans, more gravity. And of course, this is the turning point, the Cimabue, who sees Giotto drawing a sheep on a rock. I often wonder about that story, is not that it didn't happen, but he sees a boy drawing from observation, eye-hand coordination, not making it up, drawing the lamb, which has such significance to us, drawing the lamb from life. In terms of the myths about the church being against anatomy, totally wrong. It's a romantic idea. It was very well endorsed. You can't really sneak bodies into San Lorenzo and cut them up in the middle of the night. So Michelangelo and Leonardo, etc., all the anatomists, there were public anatomies going on. And this idea of making it, again, as present, as witnessing, and as transcendental as possible. Our Lady, the lactating, how are we going to get this image back in? The lactating Madonna, where Our Lady exposes one breast. She nurtures the two natures of the Christ child, both the human and the divine. So there's always one breast exposed, one breast covered. So again, go over the creed. Born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate. Here's Brunelleschi's nude, naked Christ. Suffered, died, and was buried. Again, these very corporeal resurrections. This one I long for, in the sense of, here is the semi-nude Christ showing his naked crucifixion to Adam and Eve on Holy Saturday. It's an amazing image. And of course, this is all to reunite us, image and likeness of God, in our resurrection bodies. And the resurrection body, very, very, we don't see a lot of these, we don't see any, really, Last Judgment paintings or sculptures happening anymore. And we need to sort of get reacquainted with that. From the Middle Ages onward, we know that the artist was told, you've got to do them without clothing. And this was a very embarrassing thing for a lot of artists in Chartres, etc. But you had to, because there's a reason. It divides the naked and the nude. Again, the resurrection body, 33 years old, in good shape. So we take on the body of Christ, in terms of literally, that's the way it was read, that when we are resurrected, we will take on this flesh again, as Adam had, perfect in the image and likeness of God. When the Last Judgment was unveiled on the eve of All Saints, this was revolutionary in the sense that it was 2 years before Vesalius printed his De Fabricas. Only the artists knew anatomy. Doctors were way, way, way behind. This is Signorelli from Orvieto. Again, the resurrection body. Everybody's got six-pack abs. No weigh-ins, no charges. This is the frontal for Vesalius. So we were, the church again did this. This is not the secular art world saying you've got to learn anatomy. Very interestingly, in the mid-'80s, when all the frescoes and a lot of different work were being cleaned, when it was discovered that underneath the fig leaves of Adam and Eve, there were, Masaccio had painted the genitals. This is where John Paul comes in and says, don't cover them. Don't cover them. So we see now a greater understanding on a visual plane of what John Paul is trying to tell us about the theology of the body. This is an Italian artist, Mazzoni, this is his first station. They're a nice series. This is Brian Wolf. So it's happening again. People, we are out there. And again, you can imagine this, not with drywall and opening. And it's this return to this Adam. Adam is always created in the creation of Adam. The creation of Adam paintings, the bodies, we don't see God playing with clay. The body is fully there in the image. What he's getting here is the likeness. And now that we have Benedict leading us in this organic progression here, we are very, very, very hopeful. And on that point, I'd like to close the lecture and thank you for your attention. And I'm sorry if I went over too late or anything like that.
We've got a few questions, Tony.
Or answers. I'll take answers too. Sure. Any questions? Yes.
My name is Joe DiMaria. I'm an architect.
Hi, Joe.
Victor Hugo, when he wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame, said, the book will kill it to beat. The invention of the printing press and the proliferation of the printed word would start to kill the sport. And I would say we've seen that happen since that time. But just a couple of years ago, this fellow John Mays, the modernist or whatever, said that trend is reversing now, that we're going back to a culture that's predominantly visual. And the image and symbol now have more meaning for people than the printed words. And you as a visual person, who does this all the time, I'd just like to know if you could comment on that. Do you see that happening?
I see it happening mainly because I don't think any one form, whether it's the written word or the music or the painting or the sculpture or the architecture or the light and shade, can actually unravel the mystery. So when you realize it can't do all that. No one form can. So yes, the printed word was going to stop frescoes. The printed word, the photograph was going to stop artists from. I didn't stop, they have different functions, but I think it really has to go back to the Catholic artist and architect to what we are illuminating and what we are hoping to reveal through that illumination. And illumination in the sense of what we are bringing light to. And if that means, the written word, the spoken word, painted, sculpted, built, it's all of it. There's no one thing. So, someone would say that's a tendency here and there. Yes.
Yeah, Mike Wallach from Philadelphia. Following up on that, I used to teach 8th grade, and I remember it was in a poor area, and I covered all the sides of the walls with images of great art from the early church all the way on. Because I figured if I didn't have a lot of influence, I figured the imagery would. And by the end of the year, the number of kids that could say things like, "Wow, that data is a beautiful thing. I'll never forget it." I knew I was having a visual impact, and it seems to me today, with going back from the book back to the visual imagery,
projected on a blank screen, yeah.
No, so how do we bring the imagery back to have an impact without, with also keeping a certain ability of simplicity? I mean, is there a way that you could have both in that?
I think it is the marriage between artist and architect from a very, very, very early on, working together through drawings and models, because if we're not in harmony in terms of light, space, the logistic constant, what I call the logistic constancy of form, space, light, and time, and that somehow all has to come together. Even though we see models of churches that took 500 years to build, we're not going to have that opportunity right now, but that sort of, can we get a painting in proportion? Can we get, for example, when we were working for the Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe, we had Duncan's elevations. We all drew eye level. Where is someone standing? What is their eye level in front of this painting? What scale proportion are we using? Are we using an 8-headed figure or 7.5-headed figure? Are any figures to be over life size? No. Okay, so there was all these things in agreement. Of course, we had a great, very understanding patron, namely Archbishop Burke, who is a great reader. He understands right away what he's seeing, and very, very supportive of the vocational artist and architect here. So we need that kind of sponsorship as well, because otherwise, it can't be left up to architect alone. It can't be left up to artists alone. We need the religious community involved here too. We need our teachers. We need all of it. So, anything else?
No, maybe I can encourage you all at the reception this evening to join together for more questions, if that's okay, and maybe we can go ahead and, is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.